The wind screams across the frozen prairie, cutting through your coat like a knife, as the first snowflakes of a brutal winter sting your face. In the Wild West, where trees are scarce and survival hangs by a thread, pioneers carved homes from the very earth beneath them, turning dirt into defiance against the cold. Join us on this journey through the ingenuity of frontier life, starting with the humble sod that sheltered dreams. If you found this journey through the rugged shelters of the Wild West as fascinating as we did, please give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel for more stories of human resilience and ingenuity. Your support keeps these tales alive. Join us to explore more of history's hidden corners. You crouch down, your hands numbed even through your gloves, and gather a clump of soil. It breaks apart, moist from the recent snow thaw, sticky enough to adhere to your palms. You glance around and observe something. The terrain itself might be your deliverance. Grass roots bind earth into tough chunks, and suddenly you grasp why the old pioneers sliced sod and arranged it into barriers. A sod dwelling may not be attractive, but in this vastness appearance isn't the objective. Existence is. The grassland extending endlessly before you conceals its mystery beneath that frozen covering. The earth held together by dense webs of roots emerges in heavy slabs when sliced with a shovel. Each section, thick and resistant, feels almost like a stone. You position one beside another, picturing a barrier taking form, dark and earthy, thick enough to withstand the gale. You may never have considered dirt could feel like security, but here in the cold it does. The established truth is straightforward enough. In the Great Plains, especially where trees were absent, settlers depended heavily on sod dwellings or soddies. Throughout the 19th century, entire families spent weeks arranging cut sod into barriers a foot thick, then smoothing the interior with a coating of mud or lime. Sod was abundant, insulating and cost-free. It was the very ground beneath their feet transformed into protection. Yet, there's a peculiar aspect to these earthen homes. Visitors sometimes joked that soddies sprouted vegetation on their roofs, creating the illusion that livestock could graze above while people resided below. Picture looking up from your dinner table to see patches of green swaying from the ceiling. Not exactly the wallpaper you envisioned, but practical enough. And rodents adore those grassy ridges too, scampering across at night like tiny unwelcome visitors. Historians continue debating whether sod dwellings were more wretched or more miraculous. On one side, they leaked mud during rainstorms, reeked of moist earth and sheltered insects. On the other, they were comfortable against wind, fireproof compared to timber cabins, and often the only barrier standing between a family and hypothermia was existence inside them. A nightmare or a clever adaptation, that depends on whose diary you examine. As you envision yourself arranging those sod bricks, you sense the heaviness of each one in your arms, damp, weighty, squishing slightly against your coat as you lift. The aroma is rich, like wet hay mixed with clay, oddly soothing in its familiarity. You slam one block down beside another, pressing them secure. The barrier grows inch by inch, the soil and rhythm steady, meditative. The wind whistles outside, but inside this circle of walls the bite lessens. You begin to feel the promise of warmth. The sound of your spade cutting into frozen earth echoes across the plain, thudding and scraping, punctuated by your own sharp breaths. Each block you carve feels like a triumph over the cold, a piece of safety extracted directly from the land. Your muscles ache, but the rhythm is mesmerizing. Step, slice, lift, arrange. Step, slice, lift, arrange. It becomes less of a task and more of a chant, a steady beat against the silence. Still, your thoughts drift to the floors. You picture awakening in the night to discover a small stream of mud trickling down the wall, splattering onto your blanket. You can almost hear your companion groaning, muttering about sleeping in a bog. And yet when dawn breaks and the snow outside sparkles like crushed glass, you would smile because you are still breathing. The walls may weep, but they keep you alive. You recall stories of settlers decorating sod interiors to soften the darkness. Drapes hung across dirt windows, vibrant quilts tacked against raw earth, even old newspapers pasted to walls like wallpaper. You envision the print curling in the dampness, headlines about distant cities half dissolved by moisture, but still a reminder of the world beyond the grassland. Strange comfort, but comfort nonetheless. The sod-dwelling hums with quiet existence. In your imagination, the smell of wood smoke mingles with the damp earth scent of the walls. The firelight glows against earthen ridges, turning them golden, almost gentle. You settle onto a rough bench, quilt wrapped tight, and listen. The wind outside sounds muffled now, like waves crashing far away instead of claws scratching at your skin. You lean back and feel the cool, rough texture of the wall against your shoulder. It feels alive, almost pulsing with the land itself. The sod's insulation keeps the interior warm long after the fire dies down, a steady embrace from the soil that birthed it. You're thankful even as a little dirt crumbles onto your sleeve. Gratitude is a powerful warmth of its own. Sometimes you picture settlers boasting that they lived in harmony with the earth, though in truth it was more desperation than philosophy. And yet there's something humbling in knowing that when the prairie tried to destroy them, they answered with the prairie itself. You look at your walls of sod and feel a quiet victory. It may not last forever. Spring rains might dissolve them, rodents might burrow through them. But for this winter they are yours. Your thoughts drift again, lazily now, to how these sod walls connect you to generations of survival. Every block you lay is a memory of someone else's struggle, someone else's determination not to let winter prevail. You can almost hear their voices. Men, women, children, cutting, stacking, patching, their laughter muffled, their curses muted, but their will to endure always strong. The fire crackles, the walls hold, and as you close your eyes you realize dirt has never felt so noble. The sod may crumble one day, grass may sprout from the roof, mice may scurry in the corners. But tonight it's a fortress against the endless cold, and for now that's sufficient. You stand at the edge of a forest, boots crunching over frosted needles, and your breath curls like smoke into the cold. Behind you stretches the open prairie with its fragile soddies and dugouts. But here among the trees another kind of shelter whispers to you. Logs, solid, straight, unyielding. Timber offers more than dirt ever could. It promises strength, height, and permanence. You step closer, running your gloved hand over the rough bark of a pine, and already you envision it lying across another, interlocked into a square my-log cabin. The first settlers who stumbled into wooded regions of the West saw these towering trees not just as shade or firewood, but as walls, roofs, and entire lives waiting to be built. The established fact is that log cabins were among the most iconic forms of pioneer housing. Their roots stretched back to Scandinavian and Eastern European building traditions, brought over by immigrants who knew precisely how to fit one log snugly atop another. A properly built cabin, they said, could hold heat like a sealed chest and keep out even the fiercest winter storm. But there is a peculiar tidbit that always tickles the imagination. Some cabins were supposedly built so hastily that settlers didn't even bother to strip the bark off the logs. You can picture it, walls lined with shaggy bark, insects burrowed deep within, the whole place scratching and crackling like a giant animal in the night. Guests might have laughed nervously, wondering if the house itself would crawl away on legs made of pine beetles. Still, when you're shivering in a snowstorm, bark becomes just another layer of insulation. Historians continue arguing whether log cabins were more efficient than soddies in the most brutal climates. Timber kept out the wind better, yet gaps between logs' chinks needed filling with mud, clay, or moss. Without constant patching, cabins could be as drafty as sieves. Some scholars suggest many early settlers suffered frostbite not outside, but inside their poorly chinked cabins. Others insist that once properly sealed, these cabins were warm havens rivaling even the sturdiness of stone houses back east. You heft an axe in your mind, its blade gleaming faintly in the pale light. The air carries the sweet, sharp scent of pine. The first strike echoes a deep, resonant thud that vibrates through your arms. Chips of wood fly, each stroke a rhythm that warms you despite the chill. Thud, crack, gasp. Thud, crack, gasp. It is back-breaking work but also hypnotic. You feel like you are carving time itself, shaping the hours into something tangible. When the tree finally groans, shivers, and crashes to the ground, the sound rumbles through the forest, startling birds into sudden flight. You rest your forehead against the haft of the axe, sweat cooling quickly in the wind. One tree down, dozens to go. A cabin isn't just a shelter. It is a forest transformed into home. You drag the log, boots slipping on icy ground, and imagine stacking it atop another. The corners notch neatly, one crossing the other like fingers clasped in prayer. You press mud into the seams, stuffing moss into the cracks, feeling the cold seep away. The wall grows higher, enclosing you in a cocoon of wood. Already you hear the future crackle of fire bouncing from the surfaces, the scent of pine mingling with smoke, the low groan of wood adjusting as it settles into place. Inside such a cabin, the atmosphere is close, intimate. The wooden walls smell faintly of resin and damp earth, and when the fire burns, the scent deepens into something sweet, almost syrupy. Your hand trails along the grain of the log smooth in some places, jagged in others. Each imperfection is a fingerprint of the forest now sheltering you. But cabins were not without their troubles. Picture lying in bed and hearing tiny scratches inside the logs, mice finding their way through cracks, insects waking from their wooden burrows. Some diaries mention settlers waking to find frost on the inside walls, sparkling faintly in the firelight. You shiver, pulling the quilt tighter, marveling that even solid wood sometimes failed against the vast cold. Still, the log cabin represented something deeper than shelter. It was a claim, a stake in the wilderness, proof that you weren't just passing through mere, it's that you belonged. Neighbors might come help raise the walls, their laughter echoing in the trees as logs were hoisted and dropped into place. Each thud of wood was a promise. We will survive here. Your imagination lingers on one such raising. The sound of men's boots crunching, women's skirts swishing, children chasing each other between stumps. Someone passes around a jug of cider, the steam of hot stew rising from a nearby fire. Laughter competes with the sound of saws biting wood. The air feels warmer even though the snow still falls, because together they are building something lasting. At night, when the roof finally rests atop the cabin, you step inside. The fire blazes in the stone hearth, its glow licking across the rough log walls. Shadows dance, flicker, bend. The wind howls outside, rattling branches. But in here it becomes a faint, distant murmur. You run your hands across the walls and feel their solidity. No mud dripping, no crumbling sod, just timber standing proud. You lie down on a rough straw mattress, quilt tucked tight, and listen to the fire crackle. Your body relaxes in a way it hasn't since stepping onto this frozen land. Even as you drift towards sleep, a thought lingers. This cabin, like the sod house, is not perfect. It leaks smoke, it needs constant repair. But here in the Wild West, perfection isn't the goal. Survival is, and with each notch of wood, each crack stuffed with moss, you edge closer to spring. Your eyelids grow heavy, the fire dies low, embers glowing faintly. Beyond the walls, wolves may howl, winds may lash, snow may pile against the door, but inside the warmth holds. You are wrapped not just in quilts, but in the strength of trees, in the patience of hands, in the stubborn will of those who refuse to let winter win. And as you drift off, you smile because the cabin is more than shelter. It is defiance carved in wood. The forest slowly thins, and once more you find yourself on the edge of open land. Out here, trees are fewer, but settlers do not simply give up when timber runs short. You glance at your wagon, canvas stretched across bent ribs of wood, the fabric already stiff from frost. For many, this flimsy sheet was the very first roof they had in the wilderness. A tent against a western winter feels laughable, yet thousands began this way. What's generally accepted from diaries and letters is that canvas shelters were the earliest step before permanent cabins. Families traveled with little more than wagons and cloth, so they stretched what they had. At first it was a temporary measure, set up for a few nights, a week at most. But in the face of an early storm, those canvas walls often became a lifeline, giving pioneers precious time before sturdier construction could rise. And there's a curious account that drifts through memory. Travelers sometimes lined the inside of their tents with newspaper pages, pasting them up with flour paste to block the wind. Picture falling asleep with headlines staring down at you, the ink smudging in the damp, The paper didn't just block drafts, it reminded families that a wider world still existed, buzzing with news they had left far behind. Experts can't quite agree on just how effective canvas really was for winter living. Some claim it trapped enough body heat to make survival bearable, especially when paired with a small iron stove. Others argue that canvas was little better than sleeping under the stars. A cruel trick of optimism rather than true shelter. The truth perhaps lies in the middle, flimsy alone, but serviceable with constant fire and clever reinforcement. Picture yourself crawling into one of these tents. The canvas walls billow slightly in the wind, a low, flat flap that keeps rhythm with your heartbeat. The smell is sharp, treated fabric mixed with the smoke of a struggling fire. You brush your hand along the fabric and feel the rough weave, stiff and unyielding against your fingers. Light seeps through in pale, ghostly streaks. It is both claustrophobic and fragile, a reminder of just how thin the line between survival and exposure can be. Your breath fogs the air inside, rising in faint wisps that catch the firelight. The little stove in the corner crackles, glowing faintly red, its thin chimney pipe poking through the tent's crown. Every few minutes you rise, feed it another stick of wood, then settle again under your quilt. Sleep never comes easily. The cold presses too close, too insistent, but still the canvas holds. You picture yourself outside in the wind, canvas creaking, snow hissing as it strikes taut cloth. The air smells of pine smoke carried on the gale. Inside, the faintest warmth lingers, enough to keep fingers from going numb. You whisper thanks for even this thin barrier, because without it you would be just another body stiffening under the stars. Over time, settlers realized these tents could evolve. Timber was scavenged, rough poles set as frames. Planks leaned against the sides. The canvas became a skin stretched tight over a skeleton of wood. Each layer added a little more defense until one day the cloth was replaced entirely by boards. A shack, then a cabin, grew slowly where once only a flapping tent stood. The process itself felt like breathing life into the wilderness. Each nail hammered, each board set against the wind, each patch of mud plastered against gaps turned the fragile into the formidable. Families would sometimes leave the canvas hanging inside the finished cabin as an inner lining, a reminder of the tent that carried them through their first bitter nights. Picture sitting at a wooden table, running your fingers across the wall, and still feeling the old fabric hidden beneath. There's an almost musical rhythm in your memory of that transformation. The pounding of hammers, the squeak of leather harness as oxen dragged logs, the sigh of canvas settling over wood. At night you hear coyotes yipping beyond the firelight, but you pull the canvas flap closed and inside it feels like another world, a fragile one, yes, but yours. The human senses cling to details in such fragile dwellings. The glow of embers painting shadows across fabric, the faint sweet smell of dried grass stuffed between ground and tent to block drafts, the constant hiss of wind outside, muffled only slightly by stretched cloth, and the sound of your own breath, steady, stubborn proof that you are still here. There's something humbling in knowing that generations passed their first winters in nothing more than canvas, patched and reinforced as best as they could. It wasn't grand, it wasn't permanent, but it was enough to get them to the next season, enough to turn despair into determination, enough to bridge the gap between dream and reality. When you picture yourself now seated inside one of those makeshift shelters, you feel both vulnerable and defiant. Vulnerable because you know how thin the barrier truly is. Defiant because even so it stands. The cold has not yet claimed you, and as long as the canvas quivers above your head and the fire flickers at your feet, you know you've beaten back the night. Your eyes grow heavy, lulled by the constant rustle of cloth and the faint warmth of flame. Outside, snow falls steady, blanketing the world in silence. Inside, your heart slows, your body loosens. You know tomorrow you will wake, drag wood, patch holes and dream of boards replacing fabric. But tonight, this fragile cocoon of canvas is enough to hold the darkness back. The tent fades from your memory, and you step forward into a clearing where something sturdier glows faintly against the dusk. A hearth, a pile of river stones carefully stacked into a low wall, their surfaces blackened by smoke. You crouch, run your fingers over the rough grit, and feel the echo of heat long since faded. A home without a fire is only a box, but a hearth turns four walls into a living refuge. Most records agree that on the western frontier, a fireplace was often the very first thing built. Before windows, before floors, even before a proper roof, families stacked stones into a hearth and chimney. With it came not only warmth, but a place to cook, to gather, and to imagine that the wilderness could become home. Without fire contained, settlers might as well have been camping in the snow. An odd little detail sometimes emerges in travelers' letters. People occasionally use stones pulled directly from creek beds, unaware that when heated too quickly the trapped moisture inside could make them explode. Picture sitting peacefully by the fire, only for a river rock to burst with a sharp crack, scattering embers across the floor. Some pioneers joked nervously about rock grenades, but the risk didn't stop them from hauling buckets of smooth stone up from the river. It was simply too convenient. There is still disagreement among researchers about how efficient those first chimneys truly were. Some argue they funneled smoke well, keeping the air inside surprisingly clear. Others note that many were little more than crude clay flues, collapsing in storms or belching smoke until everyone's eyes watered. Was the frontier hearth a marvel of folk engineering or just a smoky compromise? The debate lingers. You kneel closer in imagination, feeding dry twigs into the mouth of the fireplace. The air inside is frigid until the first spark catches. Then slowly a faint crackle begins. The smell of resinous pine smoke curls upward, sharp and sweet. Sparks pop like miniature fireworks, and you lean back mesmerized. Soon larger logs hiss as they burn, filling the cabin with warmth that seeps into your chilled bones. The sensory world of a frontier hearth was intoxicating. The glow of firelight painted golden ripples across log walls. Shadows swayed and bowed with every flicker, turning rough rooms into places of drama. The crackle was steady, hypnotic like a lullaby sung in wood and flame. The heat pressed forward, soft at first, then heavy until frost on the inside walls melted into thin rivulets. And then there was the taste. Pots dangled from iron hooks, hissing as stews bubbled within. Bread baked in cast-iron Dutch ovens, filling the air with warmth more comforting than quilts. You break off a crust in your imagination, steam rising against your face, and realize the hearth was not only about warmth of body but warmth of spirit. Families laughed, argued, prayed, all within arm's reach of the fire. Of course, danger lingered constantly. Chimneys cracked, sparks leaped, roofs caught. Children were warned not to wander too near, yet they always did, drawn by the flicker of flame. Some cabins built clay and stick chimneys that collapsed in storms, leaving families scrambling to rebuild in the snow. Others lined hearths with iron plates scavenged from broken stoves. Anything to keep the fire contained. The Wild West was never forgiving, even in the comfort of one's own home. Picture the rhythm of a winter's evening here. The wind howls outside, rattling shutters and hissing through the cracks. Inside, the hearth roars with defiance. Someone stirs a pot, the spoon clinking gently against iron. Children whisper in corners, quilts pulled tight, their faces glowing red in the firelight. Adults lean closer to one another, talking in low voices, the flames painting their eyes with reflection. The fire becomes more than heat. It becomes the heartbeat of the house. The texture of life settles around you. The smell of singed wool where a blanket brushed too close to sparks. The faint grit of ash underfoot tracked in by boots. The soft sigh of a log shifting as it burns, sending a shower of sparks into the flue. The world outside may be white and lifeless, but here within stone and flame, life pulses warmly. You think about how settlers marked time by the fire. They woke at dawn to coax embers back into flame, spent evenings feeding logs until they dared to sleep, and measured the passing of hours by how far the coals had fallen. There's something almost meditative about this rhythm, a surrender to the dance of flame. It made the wilderness feel less infinite, less indifferent. Even as your mind drifts, you remember stories of hearths glowing so hot that families claimed they forgot it was winter. Perhaps it was exaggeration, perhaps not. Either way, the stone hearth carried them through storms that howled for days, through nights when wolves prowled near the door, through months when snow buried roofs. It was a fragile miracle built from rocks and sweat, but it worked. And as you lean back now, eyes heavy, the fire still glows steady in your imagination. Sparks drift upward, vanishing into the chimney. The stones radiate quiet heat, the kind that lingers long after flames fade. Your body loosens, your breath slows. Beyond the walls, the cold remains merciless. But here, before the hearth, you have found not just warmth, but something like peace. The hearth's glow softens into embers in your mind, and you step back out into the icy air. Snow drifts higher around your boots now, muffling every sound except the crunch of your own steps. You glance at the cabin wall beside you and notice something peculiar, snow packed thick against its base. At first you think it's just the storm's doing, but then you realize this was deliberate. The settlers discovered that snow, ironically enough, could be used as insulation. It is well established that snow is a surprisingly effective barrier against cold. As strange as it seems, the trapped pockets of air within packed snow actually keep heat from escaping. That's why igloos built by Arctic peoples for generations could remain comfortably above freezing even in brutal temperatures. On the western frontier, families soon learned the same principle, banking snow against the sides of cabins and soddies to block the wind's icy fingers. One curious story told in homesteaders' letters recalls children being given the chore of snow chinking. While adults mended walls with clay or moss, the youngsters shoveled snow right up against gaps. They turned it into a game, piling it as high as they could until cabins looked half swallowed by drifts. The work kept them warm through movement, and the result made the inside far cozier. Scholars remain divided over just how widespread this practice was. Some argue that snowbanking was used regularly, particularly in timber-poor regions where soddies leaked badly. Others suggest it was more an act of desperation in unusually harsh winters. There is no unanimous answer, only scattered anecdotes, diary lines, and the occasional sketch showing walls half buried in whiteness. Picture yourself stepping outside into a storm, shovel in hand, and deliberately piling snow against your own home. The wind whips your face raw, snowflakes sting your eyes, but each shovel pressed against the wall feels like a defense. The sound is muffled, a dull, hollow thud of shovel meeting drift, followed by the gentle sigh of powder settling. Your fingers ache, but you keep working because you know that this wall of snow will hold the warmth inside where you need it most. When you return indoors, the difference is immediate. The wind no longer whistles through cracks quite as sharply. The air feels heavier, more stable. It is still cold but less biting, less cruel. You brush snowflakes from your shoulders, stomp the drifts off your boots and settle by the fire, grateful for the strange protection given by the very element you feared. The sensory details deepen. You can smell the faint dampness where snow presses against wood, the musty scent of earth mingling with icy freshness. You touch the wall inside expecting cold, but it feels almost neutral, the snow outside insulating more than freezing. You hear silence, thick and padded, as if the whole world has been wrapped in wool. Even the storm's howl sounds distant now, muted by your own handmade fortress of white. Of course, risks came with this method. Too much snow piled on a roof could collapse it. Packed too tightly against poorly built walls, moisture might seep in and rot wood come spring. Families balanced on a thin line between protection and disaster. And yet, when temperatures plunged, they often had no choice. Survival meant improvisation, even if the cure carried its own risks. In your mind's eye, you picture children laughing as they shovel, unaware of the danger. Their cheeks glow red, their breaths puff like little chimneys, and their giggles echo strangely in the muffled air. For them, it is play. For the parents watching from the doorway, it is insurance against death. The contrast lingers with you, snowball fights blending into life or death engineering. Sometimes neighbors would even compete, boasting about who could bury their home deeper in drifts. A visitor might stumble into a settlement and see nothing but a line of rooftops poking above white hills, smoke rising in lazy curls. Inside those snow-wrapped homes, families sat snug, their windows frosted into lace patterns, their breath invisible in the thicker warmth. The quiet in such moments must have been profound. No creak of trees, no call of birds, no distant river, only the crackle of the hearth and the occasional drip where melting snow seeped through. The cold world outside was silenced, transformed into insulation, and inside life continued in a cocoon of strange comfort. You lean back and close your eyes. The memory of snow pressing close feels heavy but secure, like an embrace from the land itself. It is not hostile in this moment. It is helpful, protective, paradoxically gentle. You hear nothing but your own breath, steady and slow, and the faint heartbeat of a fire that never seems to go out. Tomorrow perhaps the snow will shift, the wind will rise, the walls will groan, but tonight you let yourself trust in the white barrier you've built. You sigh, sinking deeper into quilts, and let the muffled silence cradle you towards sleep. The muffled silence of snow gives way to another memory, the smell of leather and musk, the feel of thick fur beneath your hand. You stand inside a shelter not made of wood or sod, but of hides dark and supple, stretched tightly across a frame. Buffalo hides stitched together with sinew turned into walls that seem to breathe warmth back at their makers. Most surviving accounts confirm that both indigenous peoples and later settlers relied heavily on buffalo hides for winter coverings. These hides were not just blankets but architectural materials pinned across doorways, draped over roofs, or stretched over wooden poles to form whole shelters. When properly cured, buffalo hide was dense, resistant to wind, and astonishingly good at holding heat. One strange little anecdote drifts through oral history. Families sometimes layered multiple hides with dried grass or even old newspapers sandwiched in between, creating what might have been the frontier version of insulation panels. Picture running your hand over such a wall, soft on the outside, but thick, lumpy, and oddly warm to the touch. Researchers continue to puzzle over just how widespread buffalo hide shelters were among settlers themselves. Many records emphasize indigenous expertise, especially plains tribes who perfected the use of hides in tipis and coverings. Some argue that homesteaders borrowed these techniques extensively during desperate winters. Others believe most settlers clung to wood and sod, using hides only as temporary fixes. The line between cultural exchange and survival necessity is blurred, and it remains a subject of lively debate. You picture yourself stepping into such a hide-draped shelter. The doorway hangs heavy with a flap of fur brushing your shoulders as you duck inside. At once the air changes. Outside the wind screamed across the plains. Inside it is hushed, warmer and perfumed faintly with smoke and the lingering animal scent of leather. You kneel down and touch the wall. The surface is cool but pliable, and it seems to trap the fire's heat, sending it back into the room in gentle waves. The fire burns low in the center, its glow reflecting against the hides, making them shine with an oily sheen. Shadows ripple across the curved walls, soft and undulating, like the inside of a living creature. The crackle of flame feels closer here, more intimate, amplified by the enclosed space. Each sound echoes faintly, a reminder that this shelter is less rigid than logs or stone, more like a skin stretched across the bones of earth. You breathe deeply. The air tastes of smoke and fur, a mixture that clings to your throat but comforts you all the same. The quilts spread on the floor feel softer, warmer, heavier than before. You realize that every part of the buffalo has gone to use the hides as walls, the bones as tools, the sinew as thread. Nothing is wasted. It is a kind of respect for survival, a truth that settlers slowly learned from tribes who had long understood this land. Yet, there are inconveniences too. Rain could soak into hides, making them sag. Freezing temperatures stiffened them like boards, difficult to move. And when the wind rose high, the walls rippled, groaned, even threatened to tear. Picture lying awake at night, listening to the fabric strain and snap, half believing the shelter itself might fly away. Still, compared to the cutting wind outside, the uncertainty of hides was worth the gamble. The daily life inside these hide-covered spaces was rich in sensory detail. Children played near the fire, their laughter echoing softly. Women stitched and mended the seams with careful fingers, their needles glinting in firelight. Men hung meat strips from poles above, letting smoke cure them. The scent of cooking mingled with the constant leather musk, wrapping the air in layers of survival. Sometimes a gust outside made the walls tremble, and ashes scattered from the fire. You picture pulling a hide tighter across the door, weighing it with stones and settling back down with a sigh. It is not a palace. It leaks, it sways, it smells. But it holds the cold at bay, and that is enough to feel grateful. Stories tell of travelers who stepped into such dwellings and felt overwhelmed by the closeness, the way heat gathered quickly, the way every voice sounded louder, the way smoke lingered low. Some complained, some praised it, but all admitted the same thing. Stepping back into the wind afterward felt like being slapped by knives. The hidehouse, for all its flaws, was a sanctuary. As you sit now in imagination, wrapped in a quilt, the fire glowing, the hides shifting gently like breathing lungs, you feel lulled into stillness. The walls seem alive, protective, almost maternal in their embrace. Beyond them, wolves may howl, snow may drift, winds may lash. Inside, you are cocooned in the gifts of the great animal that once roamed these plains in thundering herds. You close your eyes and think about how survival on the frontier was not just about ingenuity, but about borrowing from the land and from those who had lived with it for centuries. The hides remind you that nothing here was wasted, and everything carried the weight of life given for life preserved. Your body loosens. The fire pops softly. The hide walls sigh with the wind's pressure, and in that half-dreaming moment, you understand why settlers, for all their hardship, sometimes spoke of winter nights as almost tender, when the world shrank to a circle of warmth, fur and flame, and the wilderness pressed close but did not conquer. The faint animal scent of hides lingers in your imagination as you step onward into a valley where the land itself offers a different gift. The soil here is red and thick, sticky when damp, almost like clay between your fingers. You kneel, scoop up a handful, and feel its weight, dense, malleable, and waiting to be shaped. Adobe, out on the far edges of the West, settlers learned to mold the very earth into bricks, crafting homes that trapped the day's warmth and released it slowly through the bitter nights. What's generally accepted from archaeological surveys is that adobe had been used for centuries before Europeans ever came westward. Pueblo peoples built multi-story complexes of clay and straw long before pioneers stumbled into the deserts. When settlers found themselves in those same climates, hot by day, freezing by night, they adapted the technique, molding bricks from clay mixed with straw, then drying them in the sun. These bricks, stacked and plastered, made walls that could outlast timber and resist flames, all while keeping interiors astonishingly temperate. Strangely enough, there are accounts of people adding unusual ingredients to their adobe mix. Everything from animal hair to ground cactus pulp, even horse manure. Each addition gave the bricks a slightly different strength or flexibility. Picture yourself stirring a pit of mud with straw and cactus pads, laughing nervously at the mess, but knowing it will soon become a wall thick enough to withstand a blizzard. There remains scholarly disagreement about just how far adobe spread outside the Southwest. Some evidence suggests it became fairly common in parts of Texas and New Mexico, while others argue that its use remained regional, tied closely to indigenous influence. The written record is patchy, leaving us to wonder, did settlers embrace adobe widely, or only when no other option stood? You picture the process now. Step by step. First, clay and straw are stomped together in shallow pits, your boots squelching as you grind fibers into mud. The smell is earthy, sharp with wet straw, and oddly sweet in the warmth of the sun. Then wooden molds are set down, miters pressed into the mix, each one filled and smoothed. Hours later, the bricks are lifted carefully to dry in rows, sun-baked into firmness. You can hear the faint crackle as they shrink, the whisper of straw fibers holding them together. When stacked into walls, the adobe feels cool to your fingertips. The texture is sandy, a little rough, almost chalky. Inside such a home, the air is still heavy with the faint scent of clay. At night, when frost settles outside, the walls seem to breathe out the day's stored heat, warming the small room slowly, steadily. You curl up in a corner, quilt around your shoulders, and marvel that earth itself has become a kind of thermal blanket. Yet adobe brought challenges too. Heavy rains could erode walls if they weren't carefully plastered. Settlers often smeared them with more mud or lime wash to keep the water out, but storms always threatened collapse. Picture lying awake while thunder rolls and rain hammers the roof, praying the walls will not melt into sludge around you. A comfort and a curse all at once. Daily life within adobe houses was rich in sensory rhythm. The soft light filtered in through tiny windows, bouncing golden off the clay walls. The floor beneath your feet felt cool, even in summer. The air smelled faintly of earth and smoke, blending into something grounding, something steady. You could run your hand along the wall and feel the grooves where straw peeked through, a reminder that these were not factory bricks but handmade, imprinted with the sweat of survival. Families found creative ways to decorate these earthen interiors. Some whitewashed walls until they gleamed bright against the firelight. Others painted them with simple colors, red or blue, turning the clay canvas into art. And many simply embraced the plainness, seeing beauty in the honest texture of soil shaped into a home. Neighbors might gather inside one adobe dwelling on a stormy night, huddled around the hearth. The thick walls muted the wind so thoroughly that conversation felt private, cocooned. The sound of rain outside became a distant patter, while inside voices rose soft and warm. You picture children chasing one another in circles, their laughter bouncing faintly in the clay chamber. The walls, unyielding, trapped every sound, turning the house itself into an echo chamber of life. There is a comfort here that differs from wood or hides. Wood creaks and shifts, hides ripple and flap, but adobe is solid, silent. You lean against it and feel unmoving strength, as if the earth itself has wrapped you in its arms. That steadiness calms you, makes your shoulders drop, your breath deepen. It's as if the land has decided for once not to fight you but to hold you steady through the long winter night. Of course, adobe could also feel claustrophobic, with no tall windows and thick walls. Light was scarce. Smoke from poorly vented fires might linger, stinging your eyes. In deep winter you might find yourself longing for a creak of wood, the sight of snow, anything but endless brown walls. Yet still, when dawn rose and you opened the door to find snow piled high, you thanked those walls for keeping you warm. The adobe home stands as both borrowed wisdom and adaptation, a dialogue between old traditions and new settlers. As you sit inside one now in your imagination, the fire glowing faintly against clay, you feel yourself becoming part of that dialogue. Your breath warms the room, your footsteps echo softly. Your presence itself adds another layer to walls that have endured for centuries. Your eyes grow heavy again. The clay radiates a slow warmth, the kind that seeps into your bones and stays. You lie back, cheek against the cool plaster, quilt pulled tight, and listen. Outside, the night rages cold. Inside, the earth holds you gently. You drift, comforted by the paradox that soil fragile underfoot could be reshaped into strength enough to guard your dreams. You leave behind the sun-baked adobe walls in your mind's eye and wander northward into a harsher landscape. Here the prairie rises into hills, and the wind howls over them like a wolf. Trees are scarce, stones are few, and snow sweeps freely across the land. In such places, settlers discovered another way to survive. They dug into the very hillsides, carving homes straight from the earth. These were dugouts, half burrow, half house, the most primitive of shelters, and yet sometimes the most enduring. Most written accounts from pioneers agree that dugouts were common where timber was absent, particularly across the Great Plains. Families drove their wagons into a bank or hillside, cut into the slope with shovels, and fashioned a front wall from sod or wood. Roofs were made from whatever lay at hand: brush, poles, sod, even wagon boards. It wasn't glamorous, but the earth provided thick insulation. In winter, dugouts often stayed warmer than the flimsy cabins above ground. One odd note preserved in diaries is that dugouts often sprouted wildflowers on their roofs come spring, because the top layer was sod marsh grass and flowers kept growing. So it was said a dugout could look like nothing more than a meadow with a door in it. Picture approaching your own home and finding daisies waving cheerfully from the roof, disguising the fact that a family huddled beneath. Specialists remain divided on how livable these structures really were. Some insist dugouts were safer, warmer and more comfortable than log cabins, at least until families could build proper houses. Others argue they were dank, smoky, and filled with vermin, barely better than sleeping in a ditch. Letters and journals give both extremes, some praising dugouts as snug havens, others damning them as holes fit only for moles. You take up a shovel in your imagination and begin digging into a frozen hillside. Each strike echoes with a dull thud, the soil hard as stone. Your breath steams, your muscles ache, but slowly a hollow begins to form. You drag out clods of dirt, boots slipping on the icy slope until the space feels large enough to stand inside. The air smells rich, damp earth, sharp and mineral. Cold seeps from the soil, but the wind is gone. Already you sense the difference. A sod wall rises at the front, rough and uneven. You press sod blocks into place, stacking them thick until only a crude doorway remains. Overhead, you lay brush, then poles, then sod again. The roof sags, but it holds. You step inside and duck low in the ceiling just above your head. Light filters faintly through cracks, and you patch them with mud. The silence settles heavy. You have made a burrow, a cave, a home. Inside, the sensations are unique. The walls feel damp, gritty under your palm, but the air is still. The smell of soil mixes with the faint sweetness of smoke from your fire. You spread straw across the floor, and it rustles underfoot. The sound is soft, muffled, nothing like the creak of timber. You light a small fire near the entrance, and smoke coils uncertainly upward, escaping through a crude flue. Your eyes water, but the warmth builds. Families who lived in dugouts often recalled the closeness. Ceiling beams dripped with condensation, sometimes dropping onto quilts in the night. Mice scurried through the straw. Snakes occasionally slithered in seeking warmth. You picture lying awake, hearing the faint hiss of scales over straw, pulling the blanket tighter in fear. Yet still, in the worst storms, dugouts did their job. They kept people alive. Neighbors would sometimes joke that prairie families lived in cellars without houses above them. Yet gatherings inside could be lively. You picture a storm raging outside, wind shrieking across the open land. Inside, lamplight flickers against damp earthen walls. Children sit cross-legged, telling stories. Adults sip weak coffee, their voices echoing softly. The dugout may look miserable from outside, but within it becomes a womb of sound and warmth. When spring comes, the dugout changes. The roof sprouts grass, even flowers. Birds land overhead, pecking at seeds. You step outside and laugh at the sight. A house disguised as a meadow. Visitors have to be shown the door, otherwise they would walk right past, assuming the slope hides nothing more than rabbits. And yet danger always lingers. Heavy rains might collapse the roof. Flash floods could drown the hollow. The damp encouraged mold which settled in lungs. Still, many families lived entire years in dugouts, raising children in earth-walled rooms, cooking meals over smoky fires, sleeping beneath sod ceilings. Diaries note children remembering these homes with surprising fondness, recalling the coziness even amid hardship. As you rest in your imagined dugout, quilt pulled tight, the earth walls close around you like a heavy blanket. The silence is deep, broken only by the fire's sigh and the occasional drip from the roof. Your body relaxes despite the damp because the wind outside cannot touch you here. For a time you belong to the earth, and the earth keeps you safe. You drift in thought, marveling at the paradox that the same soil meant for planting and burial also became refuge. Dugouts were crude, perhaps undignified, yet they whispered a truth. Sometimes the simplest hole in the ground is all that stands between life and death on the frontier. And as you close your eyes, lulled by the muffled quiet, you accept that truth, grateful for its embrace. The earthen dugout fades behind you as you step into a place far less quiet, far less solitary. The sound reaches your ears first, an hammer striking metal, boots thudding against boards, voices calling over one another. You've wandered into a railroad shantytown, one of those makeshift settlements that sprouted like mushrooms along the growing tracks of the West. Here, survival in winter was less about permanence and more about improvisation. It is well documented that wherever rail lines stretched, Small temporary towns sprang up to house workers. They were thrown together quickly, often with scrap lumber from supply depots, sheets of tar paper, and salvaged canvas. No one expected them to last. Yet men and their families huddled within them through brutal winters. The roofs sagged, the walls rattled, but they were shelters of necessity, erected in days rather than weeks. A peculiar detail that appears in workers' accounts is the use of railroad materials themselves as building supplies. Discarded ties became beams, while bent rails were sometimes hammered into door frames or even used as makeshift anchors for walls. Picture sleeping in a shack where your bed leaned against an iron rail once destined for the main line. It was both absurd and resourceful, proof that nothing went to waste when survival was at stake. There is continuing disagreement among social historians about whether these shanty towns provided a sense of community or only misery. Some describe them as lively, filled with camaraderie, singing and shared meals despite hardship. Others paint them as bleak, cold and disease-ridden, barely better than tents strung along the tracks. Perhaps both are true depending on the town, the winter, and the resilience of those who lived there. You step into one of these rough shacks now in your mind. The walls are thin, patched together with uneven boards. Tar paper flaps loosely, its edges crackling in the wind. A lantern swings from a bent nail, its flame trembling against the draft. The air smells of kerosene, tar, and the faint sour tang of damp wood. Every creak and groan reminds you that this structure is temporary, barely standing, yet it shelters you from the icy gale. The floor crunches under your boots, a scattering of sawdust and frozen mud. Straw lies in the corners, stuffed into gaps to block the cold. You run your hand along the wall and feel the tar paper, brittle and waxy under your fingers, almost peeling away in strips. The wind outside pushes hard, rattling the shack, but the boards hold for now. Inside, life presses close. Men sit shoulder to shoulder on rough benches, their breath steaming in the air. Someone plays a fiddle, the tune scratchy but spirited, echoing oddly in the cramped space. A pot of beans bubbles over a small iron stove, its lid rattling with every gust. The smell fills the shack, earthy and comforting, though smoke lingers low, making your eyes sting. You picture the clamor of voices. Workers swap stories, boasting about how many ties they've laid or cursing the foreman in low growls. Laughter rises, followed by a hacking cough, the sound of someone pouring coffee into a dented tin cup. Children scurry between legs, their laughter bright, though they too shiver under patched coats. The noise is constant, alive, the very opposite of the muffled silence you left in the dugout. Yet danger lives in these walls. Fires break out easily when stoves tip or lanterns spill. Coolness spreads quickly in the crowded air, and when the wind turns fierce, whole shacks have been known to collapse, their flimsy boards giving way under snow. Still, workers rebuild, nailing boards back together, hammering tar paper flat, because trains must keep running and people must keep warm. Outside, the scene is just as vivid. Rows of shanties lean against one another, roofs patched with whatever was at hand, tin sheets, blankets, even canvas painted with tar. Smoke rises in uneven plumes. The air carries the constant clang of hammers, the whistle of distant trains, the crunch of boots in snow. Dogs bark, horses whinny, children shout, all blending into a ragged symphony of survival. At night, the whole settlement seems to glow faintly, lantern light leaking from cracks and flapping seams. From a distance it might look fragile, pitiful, but step inside, and you feel the fierce determination. These walls, however crude, hold the night at bay. Your senses soak in every detail, the bitter tang of smoke clinging to your clothes, the constant draft sneaking through cracks brushing your cheeks like icy fingers, the warmth of bodies pressed close, each breath adding to the small cloud of shared heat, the rattle of the shack in the wind at once frightening and reassuring. You are reminded that survival is not always elegant. It is often noisy, crowded, patched together with whatever scraps lie nearest. Tomorrow some of these men will leave, moving further down the line. New shacks will rise, just as crude, just as fragile. This town may vanish, its boards scattered, its tar paper burned or buried in snow. But tonight you sit inside one, quilt pulled around your shoulders, lanterns swaying above, listening to the fiddle and the wind. The shanty town embodies both the hardship and the strange warmth of community. Alone, the cold might kill you. Together, even in flimsy walls, you endure. And as your eyes drift shut, rocked gently by the rattle of boards, you understand that sometimes survival is less about what you build and more about who you build beside. The clamor of the shanty town fades from your ears, replaced by the steady cadence of boots on packed snow and the crisp snap of a flag in the wind. You've reached a frontier fort, its silhouette stark against the pale horizon. Square walls of timber rise high, watchtowers jutting from the corners, gates creaking as they open to admit you. Unlike the sod or the dugout, this place was built with intent not just to shelter a family, but to guard whole groups through the winter. It is well established in military records that forts dotted the western frontier, serving both as defensive outposts and community centers. Their structures were more durable than the scattered cabins of homesteaders, often combining timber palisades with stone foundations. Within their walls stood barracks, storehouses, blacksmith shops, and sometimes even chapels. For soldiers stationed there, winter survival depended not on improvisation but on discipline, design, and sheer numbers. A curious tidbit emerges from journals of enlisted men. Many forts had walls chinked not only with clay, but with horsehair and ashes, a strange mixture thought to keep drafts from seeping through. The men joked that the horses stood guard twice, once in life and again in the very walls themselves. Picture pressing your hand against a timber log, knowing strands of mane and tail were woven into the mud, sealing its cracks. Scholars still discuss whether these forts offered real comfort compared to civilian cabins. On one hand, soldiers had routine rations, regulated firewood supplies, and communal stoves. On the other, barracks were crowded. Air was often thick with smoke and disease spread quickly in the close quarters. Was the fort a fortress of security, or merely a wooden prison against the cold? The debate continues among historians, each diary giving its own perspective. Step inside the barracks in your imagination. Rows of bunks stretch down the length of the room, straw mattresses stuffed into rough wooden frames. The smell is heavy: smoke, sweat, damp wool, and boiled coffee. Boots line the wall, crusted with snow, while coats hang in uneven rows. At one end, a stove glows faintly, its iron surface radiating heat that barely reaches the furthest bunks. You sit on the edge of a straw mattress, quilt drawn around your shoulders, and hear the low murmur of men talking, coughing, snoring. The air is thick, almost oppressive, yet it is warmer than the outside. You run your hand along the wall and feel the rough grain of logs, sticky with resin in some spots, slick with frost in others. The chinking holds, but drafts slip through, making the lantern flames waver. Every sound amplifies: the crackle of fire, the scrape of boots on the floor, the clink of tin mugs. In the stillness between, you hear the wind pressing against the fort walls, trying in vain to claw its way in. The fort is more than shelter, it is order. Guards pace along the walls, their footsteps echoing above. Drums beat faintly at dawn, calling men to duty. Even in the depths of winter, routines are kept: drills in the snow, repairs to palisades, watch rotations through icy nights. You picture standing atop the wall, snowflakes stinging your cheeks as you scan the empty plain. The horizon stretches white and endless, but inside the fort, structure holds chaos at bay. Meals are communal, eaten in long mess halls where smoke gathers near the ceiling beams. The taste of salted pork, beans, and hard tack fills your mouth, bland yet sustaining. Coffee boils constantly, its bitter scent clinging to every corner. Men trade stories between mouthfuls, their voices echoing in the wooden chamber. Sometimes laughter erupts, sometimes silence settles heavy, but always the fire burns and always the food comes on time. That reliability feels like a luxury in this land of improvisation. At night, the fort grows quieter. The gates creak closed, torches flicker, and the world outside seems to vanish. In your bunk you hear the muffled howl of wolves, distant and eerie, but it does not pierce the fort's defenses. You pull the quilt tighter, the straw crunching beneath you, and close your eyes with a rare sense of safety. Whatever else the fort may lack, it offers protection, and that alone lets you rest. Yet the fort also carries an undertone of unease. Harness thrives here in winter. The air grows stale, coughs spread like wildfire. The close quarters that bring warmth also breed fevers. You picture lying awake, listening to the labored breathing of your neighbor, wondering if you will fall ill by morning. Survival here is not only about cold, but about the invisible threats that linger in shared air. The texture of fort life seeps into your senses. The feel of rough wool blankets scratching your skin. The sound of boots stomping snow off at the door. The sight of frost creeping across the inside of window panes, delicate as lace. The smell of tallow candles burning low mingled with wood smoke. It is both claustrophobic and strangely comforting, a paradox that defines every winter behind the palisade. Still, there is camaraderie here that softer homes cannot replicate. Men sing quietly in the evenings, their voices blending with the crackle of stoves. A fiddler plays a tune, boughs scratching against strings and boots tap along in rhythm. You picture yourself leaning back, eyes half closed, lulled by the hum of voices and the warmth of company. The fort may be harsh, but it holds life within its walls, and that life is enough to make winter survivable. When spring finally comes, the snow melts from the palisades, the gates swing wider, and the fort breathes easier. But for now, in the dead of winter, you lie wrapped in the disciplined comfort of barracks, knowing the walls stand strong, the fires burn steady, and the routine carries you forward, one day at a time. You close your eyes. The drums are silent. The guards pace above. The stove hums faintly. Beyond the walls, the cold rages on. But here, within timber and stone, you are cocooned in the order of survival. The sound of drums and the order of the fort fade, and you find yourself walking along a narrow river, your breath hanging white in the air. Here, the wilderness feels more solitary again. No barracks, no sergeant shouting orders. Instead, a single trail of footprints wends into the trees. You follow, and soon a small cabin comes into view, smoke curling lazily from its chimney, pelts hanging stiff from a rack. You've stumbled upon the dwelling of a fur trapper. Most accounts from the fur trade era agree that trappers and traders often built modest one-room cabins in remote places where they could live through winters. These cabins were never grand, just 4 walls of logs, a roof steep enough to shed snow, and always a hearth or stove in the center. What set them apart were the furs themselves, stacked against walls or spread across the floor. Those pelts weren't just wealth. They doubled as insulation, turning drafty spaces into warmer dens. A curious little detail appears in some trapper journals. They often used bear or wolf pelts as doors in place of wood. A heavy skin hung over the opening, weighted with stones or nails, kept out snow and wind surprisingly well. Picture ducking through a doorway and brushing past a wolf's fur still bristly with the memory of the hunt. It may feel eerie, but it was practical. There is still debate among historians about whether trappers' cabins were comfortable havens or lonely prisons. Some emphasize their snug warmth, filled with pelts and provisions, a perfect refuge against winter. Others highlight the dampness, the smoke-filled air, and the crushing solitude. Did trappers thrive in independence or suffer in isolation? The surviving diaries leave room for both interpretations. Step inside one of these cabins in your imagination. The first sensation is smell, thick, musky, almost overwhelming. Furs hang from rafters, each carrying the scent of the animal it once was. The air is smoky from a small iron stove, its glow casting flickers of light across the walls. The floor is rough, scattered with straw and scraps of hide. You run your hand over a pelt, soft, warm, thick as a quilt, and realize that in this world animals became both currency and comfort. The trapper himself moves with deliberate slowness, tending to the stove, mending a net or scraping a hide. His boots are cracked, his beard frosted with ice. He hums low, a sound almost lost beneath the crackle of fire. The room is cluttered, traps leaning in a corner, rifles propped by the door, sacks of dried beans stacked against the wall. Every item has its place, every object a purpose. You sit down on a rough bench, quilt draped over your shoulders. The stove radiates warmth, but it doesn't reach far. The firs hanging nearby serve as insulation, muting drafts and muffling outside sounds. Your fingertips trail across the log wall, rough and sticky with resins, then over a raccoon pelt, smooth and plush. You feel the difference instantly. The wood cold, the fur alive with stored heat. At night, the cabin closes in further. The stove's glow shrinks, embers winking low, shadows thicken, stretching long and strange across the fur-lined walls. Outside, the howl of wolves rises, eerie and close. Inside, you hear only the steady breathing of the trapper as he sleeps on a pile of hides, wrapped in blankets that smell of leather and musk. The silence is heavy, broken only by the occasional snap of a log in the stove. Daily life here was simple, repetitive, yet demanding. Each morning the trapper would stomp into the snow, boots crunching as he checked lines of traps along the river. By midday he returned, arms laden with frozen pelts, his face raw from the wind. He thawed them by the fire, stretched them on frames, scraped them clean and stacked them in neat piles. The rhythm was endless: trap, skin, dry, patch, repeat. The cabin was both workshop and home, its air thick with the mingled scent of smoke, fur, and sweat. You picture how time passed in such solitude. Some trappers carved notches in beams to mark the days, their knives scratching slow progress into the wood. Others talked aloud to themselves, their voices echoing in the small space. Still others filled the silence with music, fiddles or flutes carved from bone. The cabin, for all its warmth, was a place where the mind wandered freely, sometimes too freely. Visitors often wrote of these cabins with awe. To stumble upon one after days in the wilderness was like discovering a miracle. Smoke rising, warmth radiating. A man inside who greeted you with rough kindness and a mug of strong coffee. Yet they also spoke of the strange weight of the place, the air so heavy with pelts, the silence so deep, the isolation so profound. You settle deeper into the bench, feeling the quiet press against you. The firelight glows softly, illuminating the curve of antlers mounted on the wall, the glint of steel traps stacked neatly. The sense of safety is mixed with unease. This is not a homestead with laughter, not a fort with drums, but a solitary refuge where one man fights winter alone. The sensory details wrap around you: the crack of ice melting in a pot on the stove, the rough touch of fur under your palm, the smoky tang in the back of your throat, the faint draft sneaking in around the door flap of hide. Each small discomfort makes the warmth more precious, each flicker of light more sacred. As you close your eyes, you imagine the life of the trapper: my days spent in snow, nights in smoke, years measured by pelts hung and sold. The cabin is both haven and cage, but without it, winter would devour him. And in this moment, nestled among furs, quilt drawn tight, you too feel the strange comfort of a world reduced to its simplest form: fire, hide, and the will to endure. The trapper's lonely cabin fades from your thoughts as you step into another kind of dwelling, one where the air inside feels alive with smoke that doesn't always know where to go. You've entered a place where the heart of survival lies in one small but stubborn invention: the chimney. A cabin without one is just a smoky box. With one it becomes a real home. But on the frontier, chimneys were anything but perfect. Contemporary records make it clear that every pioneer family wrestled with this problem. To have warmth, you needed fire. To have fire, you needed a way to let smoke escape without letting the heat go with it. Some families built chimneys of stone, others of clay and sticks plastered together, and some made crude flues from mud and sod. None of them worked flawlessly. The difference between a snug evening and a house filled with choking smoke often came down to how clever or lucky the builder was. One odd note that drifts from homesteaders' memoirs is that some settlers stuffed bottles or jars into their chimney walls. When heated, the glass would supposedly absorb and radiate warmth back into the room. It was a strange experiment, not always successful, but you can picture the glow of firelight catching in those glassy orbs, turning a drafty chimney into a kind of primitive lantern. Experts remain divided about whether early chimneys helped more than they hurt. Some accounts praise them as life-saving inventions that drew smoke efficiently upward, keeping rooms clear and breathable. Others argue that many simply belched soot back inside, leaving families coughing, their walls blackened, their quilts permeated with the stench of ash. Even now, historians can't quite agree. Were these chimneys triumphs of frontier ingenuity or half-baked compromises? Picture yourself kneeling before a hearth, watching smoke curl upward. At first it rises steadily, disappearing into the chimney. Relief washes over you. You can breathe. Your eyes don't sting, the air feels clean. But then a gust of wind rattles the walls, and suddenly the smoke billows back down, filling the room in a choking grey haze. You cough, wave your hand, tears streaking your cheeks, and scramble to adjust the damper. Life inside depends not just on fire, but on mastering this delicate balance. The sensory world is rich and intense. The walls smell of soot, sticky to the touch. The air tastes bitter, ash clinging to your tongue. Your ears catch the hollow roar of wind through the chimney like a distant howl echoing in the flue. And always the fire crackles stubbornly, almost mockingly, reminding you that warmth comes at a cost. Families tried endless tricks. Some built chimneys wide enough to stand inside, thinking the sheer size would tame the smoke. Others narrowed them until flames sputtered, nearly suffocated. A few plastered them with mud every season, knowing that cracks meant sparks and sparks meant disaster. And always there was the constant chore of sweeping soot, climbing precariously onto icy roofs with brushes or branches to keep flues clear. You can picture the frustration. Imagine waking in the night to find smoke pooling thick above your head, eyes burning, lungs aching. You scramble to open a shutter, icy wind blasting in as the smoke escapes. The cold seeps in with it, undoing hours of careful fire tending. You lie back down, quilt pulled to your chin, muttering that tomorrow you'll patch the flue again, but tomorrow will bring the same struggle. And yet, when the chimney worked, the difference was miraculous. The room glowed warmly, the air felt breathable, and for once you could sit by the fire without coughing. Meals cooked evenly, light shone bright, and conversation lingered longer into the night. The chimney became not just an escape for smoke, but a symbol of progress, proof that your home was more than a hut. It was civilized even in the wilderness. The rhythm of life revolved around it. Children gathered close, reading by firelight, while the chimney hummed softly above. Mothers hung kettles from iron cranes, stirring stews that bubbled rich with beans and salted pork. Fathers leaned back in rough chairs, sighing as the warmth sank deep into weary bones. Outside, the wind screamed. Inside, the chimney carried it away, replacing chaos with a calm hum of survival. Of course, danger never vanished. Sparks leaped from chimneys, igniting sod roofs or brush piled too close. Whole cabins went up in flames because of one ember carried skyward. You picture lying in bed, hearing a sudden crackle above, realizing the roof has caught. Panic erupts, buckets of snow hurled upward, shouts piercing the night. Even salvation carried risk. Still, you think of the sound that soothed more than any quilt, the steady draft of a chimney pulling smoke upward, leaving the hearth to glow pure and steady. It was a frontier lullaby, a reminder that human hands could coax order from chaos. The chimney was imperfect, fragile, but it was a fragile miracle. You close your eyes now, hearing the faint whistle of wind up the flue, feeling warmth seep across your skin. The air smells faintly of pine smoke and singed wool, but it is breathable, almost sweet compared to the choking haze you endured before. You let your body relax, trusting in the draft above, and sink into the rhythm of fire and chimney. Outside, the night howls mercilessly. Inside, you breathe easy at last. The smoky breath of the chimney drifts from memory, and you step into another kind of shelter where warmth doesn't just come from fire, it comes from people pressed close together. Ahead of you rises a long plain building, its roof sagging slightly under snow, lantern light glowing faintly through slits in the wood. As you push open the door, a wave of warmth hits you, not from the stove in the corner, but from the sheer body heat of dozens living under one roof. You found yourself in a frontier bunkhouse. It is well known from records of mining towns, ranches, and frontier settlements that bunkhouses were common in the late 19th century. They were large communal shelters, often built quickly from whatever timber was available, designed to house men working far from home. Inside, rows of bunks or hammocks lined the walls and every inch of space was used. These structures were not luxurious, but they allowed workers to share heat and resources in the depths of winter. A curious detail that shows up in old ranch accounts is that bunkhouses sometimes had straw packed directly between the inner and outer walls, a primitive insulation. When it decayed, mice ran riot, scratching and squeaking in the night. Picture trying to fall asleep, while dozens of men snored, coughed and muttered, and in between their noises you heard the scurry of small paws in the walls. It was crowded, life layered with tiny irritations. There is still disagreement among historians about whether bunkhouses fostered camaraderie or bred resentment. Some accounts celebrate them as lively, filled with laughter, songs, and the warmth of friendship. Others describe them as grim, filthy, and tense, where quarrels sparked easily in cramped quarters. The truth likely wavered, shifting with the men, the work, and the weather. Step inside with your imagination now. The air is thick, heavy with smoke, sweat, and the sour tang of damp wool. Lanterns swing faintly from the rafters, their light dim and smoky. Rows of bunks line both sides of the hall, some with quilts hanging down for privacy, others bare. The floorboards creak beneath boots, and the sound of voices hums in the background like a restless tide. You find a place on a bunk, its straw mattress rustling beneath you. The quilt is patched, rough against your skin, but the heat in the room makes it almost unnecessary. You can feel the presence of others all around, the weight of bodies shifting, the rhythm of breath, the occasional cough breaking the steady drone. Even without the stove, this many people together create a cocoon of warmth, uncomfortable yet life-saving. The sensory experience is overwhelming. The smell of tobacco smoke lingers in the air, mingling with sweat and damp wool. The sound of boots thudding as men return from work echoes through the space. A fiddle strikes up in the corner, the tune scratchy but cheerful, accompanied by low voices humming along. Someone laughs. Someone swears softly. Someone sings a line of a song from home. The bunkhouse is noisy, alive. A patchwork of survival stitched from dozens of beating hearts. Meals are eaten together at rough tables in the same hall. Tin cups clatter, spoons scrape against bowls, voices rise in argument and laughter. The taste is simple: beans, bread, salted pork, but shared food feels richer, warmer. You can almost hear the scrape of chairs and the murmur of stories told between bites, recalling distant families or joking about the day's work. At night, the bunkhouse does not grow silent. It changes pitch. Snoring begins, loud and uneven. Someone whispers a prayer. Another shifts restlessly, straw crunching beneath them. Rats scurry in the shadows, emboldened by the crumbs left on the floor. The air grows warmer still, heavy with the press of bodies. You lie back on your bunk, staring at the ceiling beams, hearing the symphony of men sleeping, and realize that solitude is impossible here. And yet there is comfort. If the roof creaks under snow, you're not alone. If wolves howl outside, there are dozens of others listening too. If fire sparks in the stove, half a dozen leap up to smother it. The bunkhouse, crowded and flawed, is also protective, a collective shield against the wilderness. You picture winter storms here. Snow piling against the walls, wind shrieking through cracks, the stove blazing as men crowd close, singing louder to drown out the gale. The walls may shake, but inside voices rise in stubborn defiance. You close your eyes and picture yourself humming along, quilt pulled up, the warmth of bodies making the cold a distant thought. The sensory details lull you further. The scratch of wool on your cheek, the faint glow of lantern light flickering through quilts, the rhythmic rise and fall of breath around you like a tide that carries you gently towards sleep. You feel the weight of survival spread thin across many shoulders, each man carrying a piece, none of them alone. Tomorrow will bring quarrels, noise, chores, the endless grind of work. But tonight, the bunkhouse shelters you with heat drawn not only from fire but from humanity itself. You sigh, let the sounds fade into background music, and drift, knowing that in this noisy, crowded refuge, you are safe from the cold gnawing just beyond the walls. The bunkhouse noise lingers in your ears, boots, fiddles, coughs until slowly the sound changes. Now you hear the faint creak of poles shifting in the wind, the soft flap of canvas and the low hum of fire crackling in the center of a circle. You look up and see a conical silhouette against the snow, tall and elegant, smoke drifting smoothly through a flap at its peak. You have stepped into a tipi, a shelter refined over centuries by indigenous peoples of the plains and admired by many who came west. It is widely recognized that the tipi was one of the most efficient portable dwellings in harsh climates. Built of long poles arranged in a cone, covered with buffalo hides or later canvas, the tipi could be dismantled quickly and moved with the herd. Its shape shed snow and rain, its flap system allowed ventilation, and its design directed smoke upward through the opening. Where settlers often struggled with smoky cabins or collapsing roofs, tipis had already solved those problems with remarkable grace. An unusual but well-attested note in travelers' journals describes how some plains families painted their tipis with symbolic designs. Lightning bolts, suns, animal spirits that not only told stories but were believed to protect the inhabitants. Picture lying inside on a winter night, looking up at a buffalo painted above your head, feeling its watchful presence guarding you from the storm. Researchers continue to discuss how much settlers adopted or adapted the tipi design. Some accounts suggest pioneers borrowed ideas, experimenting with conical shelters of their own when caught in snowstorms. Others believe most settlers admired tipis but lacked the skill or materials to reproduce them effectively. The question remains unsettled, but what no one denies is that many observed tipis with awe, admitting their superiority to canvas tents and flimsy cabins in winter. Step inside one with your imagination now. The first thing you notice is space. The tipi feels tall, airy, unlike the low dugout or the cramped bunkhouse. Light from the fire rises upward, illuminating hides stitched carefully together, glowing warm and golden. Smoke curls in graceful spirals toward the opening at the top, slipping out into the cold night. The air inside is warmer than you expect, the heat distributed evenly by the draft. The sensory details surround you. The hides smell faintly of musk and smoke, rich and earthy. The floor is covered in furs soft beneath your boots, muffling your steps. A low murmur of voices fills the air. Family members talking, children whispering, laughter mingling with the fire's crackle. Every sound feels close yet gentle, softened by the curved walls. You kneel near the fire. Its glow warms your face while your back stays comfortable thanks to the insulating hides. A pot hangs above the flames, steam rising fragrant with herbs and meat. You taste the air, savory and smoky, and realize how central food and fire are in this space. They are the heart around which everything else revolves. At night, the tipi becomes almost magical. Flames flicker against painted designs, making them seem to move, coursers galloping, eagles circling, lightning flashing. The wind outside howls, but the conical walls deflect it, creaking softly yet holding firm. You curl beneath a quilt or fur, listening to the rhythm of breath around you, and feel not only sheltered, but part of a rhythm older than the frontier itself. Of course, tipis were not without their challenges. In extreme cold, the hides could stiffen, making them harder to adjust. Snow sometimes drifted inside around the base, and moving them required effort, especially in blizzards. Yet compared to canvas tents or soddies, their balance of portability, insulation and ventilation was unmatched. Settlers often marveled that indigenous families could strike camp, travel miles and re-establish shelter in a single day, something most homesteaders could never dream of. Picture the daily rituals inside: women tending fires, children playing with carved toys on fur mats, elders telling stories while the flames danced across their faces. Songs rising, echoing faintly in the cone. The tipi was more than shelter. It was a cultural center, a space infused with meaning, memory, and continuity. For a moment, you picture yourself lying back, staring upward. The poles converge above you like ribs of a great creature. The night sky faintly visible through the smoke hole. Snowflakes drift down now and then, melting as they touch the warm air. You feel as though you are both inside and outside, both protected and still part of the wider world. It is a balance few other shelters offer. Visitors sometimes described tipis as miraculous in winter, astonished at how warm they felt compared to the log cabins they knew. One even wrote that the storm outside is forgotten once you sit within, as if the world has kindly withdrawn its teeth. You can sense the truth of that now. The storm raging beyond seems far away, almost unreal, while inside warmth and companionship hold sway. The tipi reminds you that survival was not only about improvisation but about knowledge honed over generations. Its design, perfected long before settlers arrived, proved what experience could teach, that the land, even when cruel, could be lived with rather than fought. Settlers often saw themselves as battling nature. The tipi showed another path, working with the elements, not against them. You breathe deeply, soothed by the warmth, the rhythm of voices, the whisper of hides shifting softly in the wind. Your eyelids grow heavy as the fire glows steady, shadows ripple, and the wind outside loses its power to frighten. Wrapped in fur, you let yourself drift, knowing that this conical shelter has carried countless families through countless winters. And tonight, in your imagination, it carries you too. The tipi's painted hides fade behind your eyelids, and when you open them again, you're standing at the edge of a rough settlement. Lanterns glow faintly through frosted windows, and the air hums with the sound of muffled voices, clinking bottles, and the occasional creak of a wagon outside. You've reached a trading post, one of those crucial frontier hubs where supplies, gossip, and survival converged. Behind its timber walls, merchants and travelers alike found not only goods but shelter from the winter's cruelty. It is commonly understood that trading posts doubled as lifelines across the Wild West. More than stores, they were social centers and sanctuaries. Their construction was usually sturdier than the shanties or soddies around them, for merchants had both incentive and resources to reinforce walls against storms. Logs were stacked thick, gaps stuffed with mud or rags, sometimes even layers of hides nailed on the inside for extra insulation. People didn't just shop there, they slept, ate, and huddled against the wind in its dimly lit corners. One peculiar practice appears in merchant accounts. Some owners tacked entire flattened barrels against their walls, creating both storage and insulation. From outside, it gave the building an odd armored look, but inside, the extra layers of wood and air trapped heat. Picture running your hand along such a wall, feeling the bulge of a barrel stave while warmth from the stove lingered in the gaps. A strange sight, but effective enough to keep frost from biting through. There is ongoing discussion among historians about whether trading posts were genuinely hospitable refuges or primarily commercial traps. Some argue they offered genuine safety, hot meals, and fair trade to weary travelers. Others claim many exploited desperate settlers, charging high prices for basics and offering only cramped, smoky quarters in return. The truth, as usual, is a blend of both kindness and exploitation, mingled like smoke in the rafters. Step through the door in your imagination. The warmth hits first, followed by the thick smell of tobacco, leather, and pine smoke. Lanterns hang from beams, their yellow glow reflecting off shelves lined with tins of coffee, sacks of flour, jars of molasses. The wooden floor is worn smooth by boots creaking beneath your step. You brush snow from your coat and look around, feeling both relief and claustrophobia as you realize how many others have crowded into this space. The stove in the center glows red, radiating comfort around it. Travelers cluster, boots stretched out, hands open to the heat. You hear their voices, low conversations about cattle drives, whispers of gold strikes, muttered prayers for spring. The sound is a tapestry of accents, each voice carrying stories from 100 miles of wilderness. Someone coughs, someone laughs, someone strums a battered guitar. The trading post breathes like a living thing, pulsing with human survival. The sensory details wrap around you. The scent of leather harnesses stacked in a corner mingles with the sweet tang of molasses leaking from a cracked jar. You taste smoke in the air, faint and bitter, clinging to your tongue. Your fingertips trace the grain of the counter, sticky with spilled syrup. The floor is gritty under your boots, dust mixed with snow, packed down by countless footsteps. Every corner hums with life, even as the wind shrieks outside. Travelers often slept in these posts, sprawled on benches or rolling out blankets on the floor after merchants closed shop for the night. You picture yourself lying on the planks, quilt wrapped tight, staring up at rafters hung with saddles, lanterns swaying gently. The warmth of the stove spreads unevenly, and you inch closer, your cheeks glowing hot while your toes remain cold. Around you strangers breathe heavily, some snoring, some whispering in dreams. It is not private, not comfortable, but it is alive, and that feels like luxury. When the prairie howls, the walls themselves tell stories. In the dim light you see carvings etched into beams, initials, dates, crude drawings of wagons and horses. Travelers marked their presence, leaving scratches like footprints in wood. You run your hand over one, the grooves deep, and wonder who carved it and whether they survived that winter. Each mark is a reminder that countless others stood where you stand now, clinging to the same fragile hope that warmth would outlast the storm. Yet the trading post was not without hardship. Supplies ran short, tempers flared, prices soared, picture needing flour, and finding the last sack sold, watching another family clutch it with relief while your children go hungry. The room's warmth could feel cruel then, mocking you as you worried over dwindling resources. And still you stayed, because leaving meant snow, wind, and death. But for all its flaws, the post was a meeting ground. You picture a night when a storm raged so fiercely no one dared leave. Families, trappers, soldiers, ranchers, all trapped together in the same room. Voices rose in song, hands clapped in rhythm. Stories unfurled like quilts stitched with memory. The post became less a store than a communal hearth. The walls lined not with goods but with shared survival. You lean back against a barrel now, feeling its curved wood press your spine. The stove's glow flickers on faces around you, tired, soot-stained, but alive. Your eyes grow heavy, lulled by the hum of voices and the constant crackle of fire. The wind hammers the walls, but they hold, padded with barrels, hides, and determination. For tonight, you are safe inside the heartbeat of the frontier. The warmth of the trading post drifts away, and soon you hear a different sound, a metallic clang echoing down a narrow valley, followed by the hollow thud of shovels striking frozen earth. Lanterns flicker in the darkness, illuminating crude shacks scattered along a hillside scarred by pickaxes. You've stepped into a mining camp where men dig into rock by day and crowd into hastily built hovels by night, clinging to warmth as fiercely as to dreams of gold or silver. What is well recorded in frontier reports is that mining camps sprang up almost overnight, especially in places like Colorado, Nevada, and Montana. Thousands of men rushed into the mountains, building shelters from whatever scraps they could find. Rough timber cut from nearby slopes, sheets of tin hammered together, or canvas patched with tar. These were not meant to last. But when winter hit, the flimsy shacks became the only line between miners and freezing death. One odd little note appears in memoirs of prospectors. Miners sometimes insulated their cabins with gunny sacks filled with sawdust. They nailed the sacks to walls or stacked them along the edges of rooms, turning refuse into insulation. It made for lumpy, unsightly interiors, but it kept the chill away better than bare boards. Picture leaning against a wall and feeling the crunch of sawdust shifting behind coarse burlap, a strange but comforting texture. Researchers remain divided about whether mining camp housing was truly survivable or merely tolerable. Some argue these shacks clustered close together, trapped enough warmth to see men through bitter nights. Others describe them as death traps, drafty, smoky, crawling with vermin, where pneumonia and fire claimed more lives than mining accidents. The evidence is mixed, and perhaps the truth depends on whose shack you stepped into. Picture yourself walking into one, now. The door groans on rusty hinges, and you duck your head to enter. The air inside is dense with smoke from a battered stove that groans as it works, patched with wire and soot-stained clay. Tin plates and mugs clutter a rough plank table. Straw lies in heaps on the floor, serving as bedding for half a dozen men who share the space. You wrinkle your nose at the sour mix of sweat, smoke, and damp wool that clings to the air. The walls are a patchwork, rough boards nailed side by side, gaps stuffed with rags, gunny sacks, even newspapers pasted with flour paste. Your hand runs along one seam where the paper headline still shows faintly, News of a distant election now turned into insulation. Snow presses hard outside, but here the walls hold thin but stubborn. Voices fill the shack. Men argue over claims, boasting of veins of silver, cursing bad luck. Laughter bursts, followed by hacking coughs. Someone plucks at a banjo, its strings twanging off key, but the music lifts the mood. The stove crackles, spitting sparks that dance across the tin plate beneath. Each sound competes with the wind's moan seeping faintly through the seams, reminding everyone just how fragile this shelter is. The sensory details deepen. The stove radiates heat unevenly, roasting your face while your back stays cold. The straw mattress under you prickles your skin, and mice dart across it boldly, searching for crumbs. You taste the bitterness of coffee boiled too long, strong enough to make your teeth ache. Your eyes sting from smoke curling thick and low, forcing you to squint as you look around. At night, the shack becomes a chorus. Snoring rises loud and jagged. Someone mumbles in a dream. Another coughs endlessly, the sound heavy with sickness. You pull your quilt close, nose buried for warmth, listening to the restless music of survival. The floor creaks as someone shifts, boots thudding softly. Outside, wolves prowl near the camp, their howls echoing in the narrow valley, but the noise inside drowns them out. Despite the misery, there is a peculiar sense of camaraderie here. Men share blankets, food, even jokes, knowing that together they have a better chance. One diary recalls a group of miners taking turns through the night to keep the fire alive, each man rising in his hour to feed the stove. Alone, the cold would have won. Together they cheated it just enough. You picture a storm night, snow piles high against the shack, rattling its tin roof like a drum. The stove blazes, glowing red, and men crowd closer, their boots pressed nearly against it. Someone tells a tall tale of striking gold as wide as a river. Laughter roars, mugs clink, and for a brief time the storm is forgotten. The walls might be thin, the roof patched, but in this circle of warmth and noise survival feels possible. Still, the dangers never fade. Sparks leap from the stove, and everyone knows one ember could ignite the shack, devouring it in minutes. Illness spreads, and a single cough could turn deadly in such close air. Yet night after night the shacks endure, patched again and again, testimony to the stubborn will of those who chose to dig for dreams in frozen ground. You lean back now, quilt tight, listening to the stove hum and the banjo twang faintly. Your body relaxes despite the noise and the smells because you sense what these men must have felt. The knowledge that while flimsy, smoky and crowded, this shack is still enough. Enough to make it through the night, enough to wake in the morning and dig again, enough to see winter bend slowly towards spring. Your eyes grow heavy. The banjo fades. The laughter softens. The stove whispers steady heat. Outside the wind rattles the tin. But inside you are cocooned in the rough determination of a mining camp. You drift, knowing that sometimes survival comes not from fine walls but from patched planks, stubborn hands, and the unshakable belief that tomorrow might bring gold.